She lost her father to corruption. She buried her past in silence. But when a wounded stranger staggered into her world, Clara Jennings made a choice that would ignite a war, unearth a deadly conspiracy, and turn a quiet widow into the West's fiercest force for justice. Stay with us, because once this story begins, you won't be able to look away. They say the forest doesn't speak, but in the wilds of Wyoming it whispers. It moans through the pines. It breathes in the silence. And sometimes, if you listen closely, it begs. On one particular afternoon in late October, when the wind howled like a warning across the highlands of Grand Teton, Clara Jennings heard that whisper turn into a cry. Not the rustle of elk or the warning call of crows, but something distinctly human. A sound so full of agony and desperation that it stopped her breath mid-motion and made her heart stumble in her chest. She had just brought the axe down on another pine log, the sound echoing across her clearing like a gunshot. Boone, her old bloodhound, lifted his head ears, tilted forward, his body tense. Clara followed his gaze to the tree line where the golden dusk cast long wavering shadows across the earth. There it was again. A groan, faint but real. Clara had lived alone out here for 4 years, alone but never defenseless. She knew every tree, every fox burrow, every bird call, and she knew down to her bones that that sound didn't belong. She set down the axe slowly and picked up her Winchester from the porch heart, pounding in a rhythm that seemed to echo the hush between gusts of wind. Boone followed her without a word, the two of them sliding into the forest with the ease of seasoned predators. The groans grew louder with each step, and so did Clara's dread. People didn't just wander into her part of the world. It was too far from any real trail, too remote, too unforgiving. The last time she saw another soul out here had been 6 months ago, and he'd been running from something. Or someone, and then she saw him. He was sprawled beneath a thicket of cedar blood, staining the leaves in deep, spreading pools. A man in his early 30s with dark hair matted to his skull and a bullet hole just under his ribs. His coat was torn, his shirt soaked crimson, and his breaths came in shallow gasps. But it wasn't just the wound or the blood, or even the half-conscious muttering that made Clara freeze. It was the glint of silver near his hand, a badge, U.S. federal agent, and beside it a revolver empty. Clara felt a chill far colder than the mountain wind crawl up her spine. Federal agents didn't travel alone, not through Grand Teton, not in October, not bleeding out like animals beneath the trees. She stood there for what felt like a century, rifle-leveled, heart hammering. This man could be a killer, a criminal wearing a stolen badge, a trap, or worse bait. But then he opened his eyes, and for a moment Clara forgot to breathe. They were dark brown, and in them she saw something more powerful than blood or fear or pain. Resolve. He wasn't begging, he wasn't crying, he was waiting to die or to be saved. His lips moved. Please, they'll come, finish it, you shouldn't be here. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, Boone pressing close. She checked the wound, saw the bubbling blood. If she didn't move fast, he'd bleed out in minutes. Don't talk, she said, voice firm. Save your strength. He grabbed her wrist, weakly eyes locking onto hers. You help me. You die too. It should have been enough to make her walk away. She should have turned back and locked her door, thrown another log on the fire, and forgotten the sound she heard in the trees. But something in his face, something haunting and familiar, held her there. He reminded her of her father in his last days, beaten down but never broken. A man on the edge of the abyss who hadn't let go yet. She tore strips from her flannel shirt, pressing hard into the wound, cursing under her breath. Then we'll die together, she muttered. But I don't leave folks to rot in the dirt. Clara moved fast. She fashioned a drag sled from fallen branches and a tarp she kept in her saddle pouch. She wrapped the man he hadn't even told her his name in what warmth she could spare, lashed him down, and began hauling. It took nearly an hour to drag him the half-mile to her cabin. Her arms burned. Her breath came in ragged pulls, and Boone padded alongside her, glancing into the woods with worried eyes. The sun was dipping below the horizon by the time she slammed the cabin door behind her and dragged the man onto her only bed. She lit every lamp, heated water, poured whiskey into a tin cup, and forced it between his lips. He drank, coughed, then drank again. Clara rolled up her sleeves and began cutting away the bloodied shirt. The bullet had gone clean through, but the damage was bad, deep, wet. It needed cleaning, stitching, dressing. "I've done worse," she whispered to herself, though her hands trembled. She sterilized her tools with fire, took a deep breath, and began the work. The man clenched his teeth, then passed out cold. Hours later, with the wound cleaned and stitched, she sat beside him, watching his chest rise and fall. He was alive. For now. She finally allowed herself to cry, but not out of fear, out of anger. Who had done this, and why? Outside, the wind picked up. Boone growled low and stared at the door. Clara stood slowly loading her rifle. Something, or someone, was coming, and the stranger in her bed had brought hell with him. But she wasn't going to run. Not now. Not ever. Justice might have left these mountains long ago, but Clara Jennings hadn't, and she was just getting started. The hours passed slowly, marked only by the creaking of the logs and the restless hiss of wind through the trees. Clara Jennings sat in the corner of the cabin, bathed in the warm amber glow of a kerosene lamp, its flickering light painting the walls with stories of yesteryear. Outside, the forest pressed in close like a living creature holding its breath. Boone, her faithful bloodhound, lay at her feet, his eyes never leaving the door. The wounded man in her bed had not stirred since she stitched his wounds. He'd survived the night, but the real danger was still circling somewhere just beyond the trees. Just past midnight he woke. At first, he didn't speak, only blinked at the ceiling, dazed and disoriented, as though unsure if he'd crossed over into the next world. Then his eyes settled on Clara. She didn't rise or speak right away. She just watched him, silently gauging whether this stranger might still pose a threat. "You're alive," she finally said. He tried to sit up, but groaned in pain and collapsed back. She crossed the room, poured a tin cup of water, and held it to his lips. He drank greedily, the cool liquid helping to bring him fully back to himself. "Elijah," he said, hoarse. "Elijah Grant, Clara Jennings." He blinked once. "Judge Jennings's daughter." "That's right," she said, her voice sharper now. "And you're going to tell me why a federal agent with 2 bullets in his body and a bounty on his head ended up dying in my woods." Elijah's throat moved as he swallowed hard. He looked past her as if trying to remember something important. Then slowly he nodded. "I was investigating corruption, deep and dangerous. The kind that grows like rot in the foundation of everything we trust. Territory judges, local sheriffs, cattle barons, names you'd recognize. Some even attended your father's funeral." That hit Clara like a slap. The memory of her father's sudden death came flooding back, an unexpected stroke, they'd said. He fell down the courthouse steps. Case closed. But she'd always felt something was wrong. Too quick, too tidy. Now, hearing Elijah say those words lit a fire deep in her chest. "There's more," Elijah said, coughing again. "I had a partner, Deputy Marshal Will Hayes. We split up to cover more ground. He never came back. I got too close to their operation. They tried to make it look like an accident, a hunting mishap in the backwoods. But they underestimated me." He shifted weakly, reached into his torn coat beside the bed and fumbled with the lining. Clara helped him as he tugged loose a flap of fabric. Inside was a carefully sewn pouch. From it, he withdrew a weather-worn piece of parchment, creased, smudged with dirt, but still legible. "A map," Clara asked. "To a hidden cache. In a canyon near Yellowstone Lake. It holds the evidence. Names, dates, payouts. Proof of a criminal network that goes beyond anything most folks could imagine." Clara spread the map on the table. It was detailed, coded, marked with symbols only someone familiar with the terrain could decipher. Her father had taught her to read maps like these. She saw instantly that it wasn't far, maybe a day's ride if the weather held. "You were taking this to someone," she asked. Elijah nodded. "To the federal marshal's office in Cheyenne. If I can get this to them, it would unravel everything. But they're watching the main roads, the rail stops. That's why I went through the wilderness. Why not burn it?" she asked. "Memorize it and destroy the evidence. Safer that way." His voice dropped, "Because I'm not the only one who needs to see it. The more eyes on this, the harder it is for them to bury it again." Clara stood over the map, her fingers tracing the inked path. She remembered faces, men who'd come to her father asking for favors, offering deals he never took. They hadn't just disliked Samuel Jennings. They'd feared him. She felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. "They killed him, didn't they?" she asked. Elijah didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence was enough. Outside, Boone growled low, his ears twitching. Clara crossed to the window and peered into the night. The forest was a wall of darkness, but her instincts screamed. Something or someone was out there. She checked her rifle, then turned back to Elijah. "Can you move?" she asked. He grimaced, barely. "Then we've got to hold them off until you can. The men who shot you didn't disappear. They'll come back. They'll burn this cabin to the ground if they think you're still alive." Elijah looked up at her eyes, clear now, despite the pain. "You don't have to be a part of this." "I already am," she said. There was a pause. Boone shifted ears, pinned, and a soft sound, a branch breaking, came from outside. Clara moved silently to the stove and doused the lamp. Darkness settled in like a blanket. She motioned Elijah to keep quiet. They listened. 1 minute. 2. Then, faintly, a voice drifted through the night air. Low, cruel, amused. "Grant, you in there, son, or did you bleed out like a dog?" Another voice laughed. "I say we burn it. Woman, too. Leave nothing but smoke." Clara gritted her teeth. She moved to Elijah's side and handed him his revolver. "It's not loaded," he murmured. "It is now," she replied, slipping bullets into his hand. "Keep low. And if you see a shadow in the doorway, shoot first." The wind picked up moaning through the pines like a spirit in mourning. Clara crouched behind the front window rifle, aimed into the night. Her heart thudded against her ribs like a drum. She had faced hunger storms and loneliness. But this was different. This was war. And it had come to her doorstep. They might outnumber her. But they didn't know Clara Jennings. Not yet. And if she had anything to say about it, they never would. There's a kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it stalks. That night, wrapped in darkness as thick as river mud, the silence around Clara Jennings's cabin became something unnatural. Boone had stopped growling. Elijah had stopped speaking. The very walls seemed to tighten around them as though the cabin itself braced for the coming storm. The fire had burned low. Clara crouched near the window, her rifle steady in her calloused hands, her pulse loud in her ears. Outside, the pine trees shifted in the wind, and in the distance she could just make out the faint shuffle of boots on frozen earth. They were close now. Men were out there, armed, angry, ruthless, and they were hunting her. Elijah lay on her bed, pale, and sweat-soaked, his wounds freshly cleaned but still angry. He'd barely slept since sharing the truth with her, the map, the conspiracy, the murder of her father. Clara had taken it all in with a steady face, but inside she burned. She had seen injustice in her life. She had buried it beside her father. But now it had returned, wearing badges and whispering lies. She wasn't going to bury anything else. Not if she could help it. A voice shattered the stillness like a rifle crack. Elijah Grant. "You're out of time, son. We know you're in there." The voice was cold sharp as winter ice. Clara knew it belonged to Silas Boone, the infamous former marshal turned predator. He didn't shout in anger. He shouted like a man offering a deal with a noose hidden behind his back. "Throw out the map, the girl, and you get to die quick," he called. "Don't, and we'll burn you both to ash." Clara didn't flinch. She raised her voice. "Come closer, and I'll make you die, wondering if the devil has your name on a bullet." Laughter echoed from the woods. It wasn't the kind of laughter shared among friends. It was the mocking sound of men who'd killed before, and didn't mind doing it again. Elijah stirred. "He'll circle." "Try the back, then wait till we're tired." "I know," Clara said. "I've hunted men before." She moved quickly, boarded up the lower half of the windows with heavy furniture, dragged sacks of flour and grain from the pantry to act as sandbags. Every corner of the cabin became part of a defense plan. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 8, taught her to track when she was 10, but it was her mother, soft-spoken and steely-eyed, who had taught her how to endure. Outside movement again, fast, low. Clara fired. A scream answered. She ducked as return shots hammered the walls. "We just bought a few hours," she muttered. The siege had begun. They came in waves, first gunfire, sporadic, then methodical, probing the cabin for weak points. Next came fire arrows, lit cloth wrapped around oil, launched toward the roof. Clara had prepared for that. She'd nailed old metal sheets across the top last spring. Sparks hissed and died on contact. One man tried to rush the front door. Boone lunged through the window jaws, snapping. The man screamed and fled into the woods, dragging blood behind him. In the quiet moments between attacks, Clara tended to Elijah. He had a fever, but his mind was clear. He helped load bullets. He covered her when she had to douse flare-ups. They spoke little. Words weren't needed. In every look, every nod, there was understanding. Clara found herself thinking of her father, not in sadness, but in resolve. He had died fighting corruption. She would not let that be for nothing. By the third hour they were low on water, low on ammunition. And Silas had not stopped taunting. "I knew your daddy, Clara," he shouted. "He was a stubborn bastard, never knew when to take a deal. Look what it got him." She swallowed hard. Pain bloomed behind her ribs, but she refused to give it a voice. "Elijah," she said, "can you stand?" He nodded. Barely. For a few minutes. "I have an idea." They waited until the next volley of shots. Then Clara kicked open the rear door, tossing burning oil at the base of a tree. It flared bright, drawing attention. Meanwhile, Elijah moved to the other window, rifle ready. Clara circled out through the root cellar, quiet as breath. She moved through the woods like smoke knees bent, rifle ready. She spotted one man crouched behind a log. Shot him. Another turned too slow. She took him down, too. By the time she returned to the cabin, Elijah was at the window, eyes alert. "You're insane," he said, grinning. "I'm still breathing," she replied. But the danger wasn't over. Silas wasn't finished. Dawn crept up slow, painting the treetops in pale gold. Clara hadn't slept. Her body ached, her hands trembled from the cold, but she was still standing. So was Elijah. Then came the silence again. Different this time. Not tense, but thoughtful. as if the forest itself waited. A voice called out, "Miss Jennings, one last offer. Come out hands up and we end this easy. Don't and I'll dig your grave with a smile." Clara stepped to the window. Her voice was steady. "You'll die before I let you take him. And if I go down, I'll take every last one of you with me." Elijah stood beside her, hand on her shoulder. He whispered, "I've known men like him. They don't believe in strength unless it's shown. Let's show them." Clara nodded. The siege wasn't over, but neither was she, and neither was the truth. The morning light arrived not with peace but with the grim promise of more blood. Whispering hollow the quiet pocket of forest that had sheltered Clara Jennings for 4 long years now felt like the edge of the world. Her cabin stood battered but defiant, pocked with bullet holes blackened at the edges, yet still whole. But Clara knew this dawn would not end like any other. This would be the end or the beginning. They came not all at once, but in careful waves like wolves learning their prey's patterns. Clara could see them from her window. Silas Boone's men, grim and armored in dust and cruelty, fanning out across the tree line. Fresh horses, more guns. And their confidence had returned. Elijah, propped against the wall with a rifle in his lap, turned his head. Looks like he called in reinforcements. Clara didn't answer right away. She studied the men's movement where they crouched, where they didn't. She saw gaps, mistakes. Maybe not in their numbers, but in their arrogance. She turned to Elijah. "You still able to shoot?" He nodded, wincing as he moved. "Won't be pretty, but I can aim." She poured coffee into 2 tin cups. It was weak near water, but hot. They drank in silence, as people do when they know they might be sharing their last sunrise. Outside, a voice called out again, "Clara Jennings. You made your point. But this is over. You and the marshal hand him over. You walk away. Last chance." She could see him now. Silas, mounted on a dark horse thick with confidence, his coat flapping in the breeze, his voice smug even in the morning chill. And just like that, her father's face flashed before her eyes. Samuel Jennings, the judge who once stood in that same spot years ago, refusing to bend to pressure, refusing to be bought. And it cost him his life. Clara stepped outside, just far enough for her voice to carry. "You call this justice?" she shouted. "You think what you're doing is right," Silas laughed. "I call it cleaning up messes, and sweetheart, you're knee-deep in one." She lifted her rifle, aimed it just above his head, and fired. The bullet struck the bark of a tree behind him. Deliberate, measured, a warning. He ducked, startled. Then rage twisted his face. "Take them," he barked. And that was it. Gunfire erupted from 3 sides. Clara dove behind her barricade. Bullets tore through the walls. The kitchen window shattered. Boone barked wildly, ducking for cover behind the stove. Elijah fired back 2-3 shots. 1 man dropped. Clara moved between her firing points, never staying long enough to become a target. She counted shots, timed their reloads. She aimed only when she had a clear view. Outside, the scent of smoke crept in. They were trying fire again. Clara ran to the back of the cabin, where she saw a man crouching with a burning torch. She fired once. He dropped the torch as he fell, setting a small patch of grass alight. Clara grabbed a bucket and doused it. She was soaked now, mud and smoke streaking her face, but she was alive, and she was angry. Then she saw him, Silas himself, moving through the trees like a shadow gun drawn. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was coming for her. "Elijah," she shouted. "He's flanking east side." Elijah tried to turn, but the pain in his side overtook him. Clara didn't wait. She grabbed her father's Colt revolver, slung the rifle across her back, and ran out the side door. She circled wide through the trees, moving like a ghost. Every snap of a twig beneath her boots felt too loud. Every breath felt borrowed. Then she spotted him. Silas crouched near a fallen log, eyes fixed on the cabin, waiting for her to peek through the front window. She crept closer, her hand steady on the revolver. Then a branch cracked beneath her heel. He spun, raising his gun, but Clara fired first. The shot struck him in the shoulder. He spun, staggered, but didn't fall. "You little," he spat, blood speckling his lips. He raised his weapon again. Clara fired once more. The bullet struck his leg and he dropped to one knee. She moved and barrel aimed at his heart. "It's over," she said, her voice low. "Drop it." For a moment he didn't move. Then, with a sneer, he tossed the weapon aside. Clara kicked it away and pulled out a pair of iron cuffs Elijah had tucked in his coat. She clamped them around Silas's wrists. "You're under arrest," she said. He laughed bitterly. "You think this matters. You think this changes anything. I've got friends in every town from Cheyenne to Helena. They'll come for me." Clara leaned close, her face inches from his. "Let them come," she whispered. "I'll be waiting." By the time she dragged Silas back toward the cabin, the gunfire had stopped. His men, what was left of them, had vanished into the trees. Elijah sat on the porch, bleeding and pale, but smiling. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied, handing him the cuff's key. "We did." He clasped the key in his hand and looked up at her eyes full of something deeper than admiration. "You ever think about doing this full time?" She chuckled, though her chest ached with fatigue. "Justice or dragging bodies through the woods, both," he said. She sat beside him, watching the smoke rise from the grass. "I think I already am," she answered. The sun had risen high now. The cabin was damaged, the porch cracked, the windows shattered. But it still stood. So did Clara Jennings. And for the first time in a long while, the world felt just a little less lost. When the riders arrived, the world was quiet. Too quiet. Birds had not returned to their song. Smoke still curled from the patches of scorched earth. Clara Jennings stood at the edge of her battered porch, her boots planted, firm arms crossed, as the group of mounted federal marshals came into view. Their coats were dusty, their faces drawn from hard riding, but their eyes widened as they took in the sight before them. 8 bodies lined in silence beside the woodpile were covered with canvas tarps. Bullet holes scarred the cabin walls like punctuation marks of defiance. The windows were shattered black powder still clinging to the sills. And sitting tied to the porch rail like a prize hog was Silas Boone, formerly the most feared bounty hunter in the Western Territories, now bruised, bound, and cursing under his breath. Sheriff Elias Montgomery dismounted first. He removed his hat and approached slowly. Miss Jennings' Clara gave a tight nod. He looked around again, then let out a long whistle. Heard there was trouble out this way. Didn't know it was a full-blown war. Clara's voice was even. "Trouble came. I just didn't let it leave." Elijah Grant stepped out of the cabin, arm in a sling, pale but upright. He held a leather satchel in his free hand. "We've got what you came for," he said, handing the satchel to Montgomery. Inside were papers, records, letters, banking ledgers, lists of names. The evidence Elijah had risked his life to protect, and Clara had risked hers to keep safe. Montgomery opened the satchel, scanned the contents, and swore softly. This will bring down half the government in Cheyenne." "That's the idea," Elijah replied. It took the marshals the better part of the day to question, verify, document. They loaded Silas Boone into a steel-walled prison wagon and gave orders to pursue his remaining men across the frontier. As they worked, Clara moved through the ruins of her home. She salvaged what she could, books her father left, the old portrait above the hearth, her mother's wedding spoon. But the damage was undeniable. When the marshals left, promising justice, promising change, promising to return soon with repair crews and a federal commendation, Clara stood watching them disappear into the trees. The hush that followed felt louder than any gunfire. Elijah sat on the porch resting. Boone dozed at his feet. Clara joined him with a cup of tea, and silence settled between them like an old friend. He finally broke it. "Do you think it made a difference?" Clara looked out at the mountains, their peaks blushing under the evening light. "Maybe not everywhere," she said, "but here in this hollow. In the name of my father. Yes, it made all the difference." Elijah watched her, his expression softening. "You're not the same woman I met in that clearing." "No," she agreed. "That woman would have let you die." "I almost did. But something shifted. I remembered who I was raised to be." He nodded. "And who was that?" She smiled. "Someone who doesn't run." They sat a while longer until the stars blinked into view. The fire crackled low, and in that stillness Elijah reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. He handed it to her without a word. Clara opened it. It was from the Federal Marshal Service. An offer, a badge, a future. "You serious?" she asked. He shrugged. "They're forming a new division. Field deputies who don't need hand-holding. Folks who know the land who don't scare easy. They need you, Clara. I need you." Her eyes met his. The fire between them had grown steadily quietly, like coals beneath kindling. Now it burned with something undeniable. She looked back at the cabin, at the broken windows, the splintered door. At the place that had held her grief, her healing, and her transformation. "You think they'll let me keep the dog?" she asked. Elijah laughed. "You could bring a whole bear, and no one would question it." Clara folded the letter. "All right then, but I have one condition." "What's that?" "We do it together, not you leading and me following. We ride side by side." He extended his good hand, side by side. And so, 6 weeks later, Clara Jennings rode into the courthouse at Cheyenne, not as a witness or a victim, but as Deputy Marshal Jennings. She wore her badge like it had always belonged to her. She testified. She stood tall, and she watched with satisfaction as one by one, corrupt men were led away in chains. Silas Boone was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 12 other officials were removed from office. The governor called her a hero. But Clara never thought of herself as such. She was just a woman who refused to stay quiet. A woman who had found her voice, her purpose, and if the way Elijah looked at her was any indication, perhaps even something more. They returned to Whispering Hollow not as fugitives, but as guardians. The cabin was repaired, the roof reinforced, the porch rebuilt. Boone still lay near the stove keeping watch, and Clara Jennings began each morning with the same ritual hot tea, a cleaned rifle, and a prayer for whatever soul might need help next. Because out there across the untamed wilderness, others still suffered in silence, still feared the knock at their door, still believed no one would come. But now, someone would. Clara would. And wherever she rode, justice followed. The West had many legends, but only a few were true, and Clara Jennings had just begun hers. When the riders arrived, the world was quiet. Birds had not returned to their song. Smoke still curled from patches of scorched earth. Clara Jennings stood at the edge of her porch, her boots planted firm, arms crossed, as the federal marshals came into view. Their coats were dusty, their faces drawn from hard riding, but their eyes widened as they took in the sight before them. 8 bodies lay beside the woodpile covered in canvas. Bullet holes scarred the cabin, and tied to the porch rail was Silas Boone, once feared, now defeated. Sheriff Elias Montgomery dismounted. Miss Jennings, Clara nodded. He scanned the scene, heard there was trouble. Didn't expect a war. Clara replied calmly, "Trouble came. I didn't let it leave." Elijah Grant stepped out of the cabin arm in a sling holding a satchel. "We've got what you came for." Inside were the record's evidence exposing corruption. Elijah had nearly died for them. Clara had risked everything to keep them safe. Montgomery looked through the files and muttered, "This could bring down half of Cheyenne." "That's the idea," Elijah said. The marshals spent the day investigating. Boone was loaded into a steel-walled prison wagon. His men were being hunted. Clara salvaged what she could from the cabin: her father's books, her mother's spoon, the portrait above the hearth. When the marshals left promising justice and repairs, Clara and Elijah sat on the porch. Boone lay dozing at their feet. Elijah asked, "Do you think it made a difference?" Clara looked to the blushing mountains. "Maybe not everywhere, but here for my father, yes." "It did. You're not the same woman I met." "No," she said. "That woman might have let you die." But something shifted. I remembered who I was raised to be. Who's that someone who doesn't run? They sat quietly until Elijah handed her a folded letter from the Marshal Service, an offer. A badge. A future. "You serious?" she asked. "They're forming a new division," Elijah said. "They need people like you. I need you." She looked at the cabin, the damage, the memories. "Think they'll let me keep the dog?" He laughed. "You could bring a bear." Clara smiled. "All right. One condition: we do it together. Side by side, side by side." 6 weeks later, Clara Jennings rode into the courthouse in Cheyenne as Deputy Marshal Jennings. She wore her badge like it had always belonged. She testified. She stood tall. She watched as corrupt men were led away. Silas Boone was sentenced to life. 12 officials removed. The governor called her a hero. But Clara never thought of herself as such. She was just someone who refused to stay quiet. Someone who had found purpose and maybe even love. She returned to Whispering Hollow not as a fugitive but as a guardian. The cabin was repaired. Boone lay by the stove. And every morning Clara brewed tea, cleaned her rifle, and said a quiet prayer. Because out there, others still feared the knock at the door. Still believed no one would come. But someone would. Clara would. And wherever she rode, justice followed. The West had many legends, but few were true. Clara Jennings had just begun hers. A legacy carved in grit final reflection. Clara's journey wasn't just about vengeance. It was about reclaiming her voice, strength, and purpose. Her story is one of powerful transformation and the quiet courage that lies within us all. From the moment she found Elijah in the woods, wounded and hunted, she had every reason to walk away. But something in her changed. She remembered her father's integrity. She realized hiding wouldn't heal her. She stepped into the storm not to be a hero, but because someone had to. Her courage wasn't loud, it was steady, enduring. Her real battle was against fear, isolation, and the silence that injustice counts on, and she won. What we can learn today, though, Clara's time feels distant, the challenges are familiar. Today, we still face injustice, loss, corruption. Clara's strength reminds us that resolve, not perfection, is what matters. Her story is a call to anyone who has ever felt powerless. You are not. You may not wear a badge, but you have a voice, values, courage. Stand up when it counts. Protect those who need you. Speak the truth. Let Clara's legacy guide you. Keep the legend alive. If Clara's story moved you, let it grow in how you face life. Extend compassion and act with courage. Support this channel. Subscribe, share, and stand with a community that celebrates resilience and the human spirit. Because the frontier spirit never truly fades. It lives on in every stand, every act of justice, every soul who dares to move forward. Thank you for listening, and thank you for helping us carry the legend onward.